It began with a trembling hand and a phone camera. No music, no fancy lights, just a man in uniform staring straight into the lens. His tone was calm, his eyes steady. "Your government is stealing from you," he said. "If we don't stop them now, this nation will collapse." Those words, simple as they sounded, were a thunderclap in a country where soldiers had stayed silent for 60 years. His name was Captain John Charles Tesha, a weapons instructor in the Tanzanian Air Force. And within minutes, that shaky livestream spread like wildfire. Across Dar es Salaam, from crowded markets to quiet living rooms, people stopped scrolling. They leaned closer. Because deep down, they all knew he wasn't lying. 2 days later, he was gone. No trial, no arrest photos, no press release. Just silence. But silence doesn't erase truth, it amplifies it. And Tesha's voice became an echo that refused to die. For a country that once prided itself as East Africa's most stable democracy, this was unthinkable. A soldier had defied power, and in doing so, he had exposed something far deeper: that Tanzania's democracy might have looked peaceful, but beneath it, something was rotting. So today we ask, was Captain Tesha reckless? Or was he simply the first man brave enough to say what everyone else was thinking? What happens when silence becomes the law and truth becomes treason? Stay with us, because this story isn't just about one man or one nation. It's about a continent, awakening one voice, one live stream, one act of courage at a time. If you believe that light is stronger than fear, please share this video and subscribe, because the truth, no matter how dangerous, deserves to be heard. It was October 4th, 2025, a quiet Saturday in Tanzania. Shops were open, boda riders zigzagged through Dar es Salaam traffic, and the city buzzed with its usual rhythm of laughter noise and the hum of ordinary life. Then, without warning, every phone across the country began to light up with the same image: a man in a military uniform standing alone in a dimly lit room, staring straight into the camera. There was nothing dramatic about it. No flag behind him, no anthem playing, no raised fist. Just the low hum of a ceiling fan and his calm voice cutting through the noise of a nation. "Your government is stealing from you. If we don't stop them now, this nation will collapse." For a moment, people froze. Was this real? A Tanzanian soldier speaking publicly, accusing his own government? That was unthinkable. Since independence, soldiers in Tanzania had lived under one sacred rule: silence. They defended borders, not politics. They obeyed, they saluted, they stayed invisible. But Captain John Charles Tesha had just broken that rule, and with it, 60 years of silence. Within minutes, the video flooded every corner of the internet. On TikTok, teenagers who normally dance to Afro beats suddenly shared clips of Tesha's trembling hands. On WhatsApp, parents forwarded the message with a single caption: "Listen carefully." Even loyal supporters of the ruling party CCM watched it twice, because deep down, something about his tone felt too true to ignore. It wasn't the tone of a rebel, it was the exhaustion of a patriot. You could hear it in his pauses, the weariness of a man who had seen his nation corrode from the inside. Not from war, but from betrayal. He spoke not like a soldier threatening violence, but like a citizen pleading for redemption. By the end of that day, the livestream had crossed borders. It was now trending in Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, and Rwanda. Across East Africa, people whispered his name: Captain Tesha, the man who spoke the unspeakable. To the outside world, it was just another viral moment. But for Tanzanians, it was an awakening. That night, radio stations went silent. The next morning, journalists were warned not to amplify unlawful messages. And by the second day, the government released a single sentence: Captain John Charles Tesha has been discharged from the Air Force for violating the chain of command. No arrest photos, no follow-up, no trace. He had vanished, erased, as if he never existed. But that's not how memory works. Because when a government erases a man, people start to remember him louder. His words became graffiti on city walls. His face appeared on t-shirts in university halls. And everywhere you went, one phrase began to spread: Ujasiri Siwasi, courage is not rebellion. What Tesha did that day was more than a statement of defiance. It was a diagnosis. He wasn't calling for chaos, he was exposing a disease. He was telling Tanzanians that their democracy, once a symbol of East African pride, had become a dynasty of silence and fear. In the weeks that followed, Tanzanians began to realize that something had shifted. The air felt heavier. Conversations became cautious. Yet beneath that fear, there was a pulse, A feeling that maybe, just maybe, the silence had been broken for good. Because Tesha's voice wasn't gone. It was replaying in every phone, in every whisper, in every uneasy dream of a nation that suddenly remembered how to listen. And as Tanzania's rulers tried to move on, pretending nothing had happened, one question echoed louder than ever. If a soldier can risk his life to tell the truth, what excuse do the rest of us have to stay quiet? To understand why Captain Tesha's words shook Tanzania to its core, you have to go back a few years to March 2021 when the country lost a man many called both savior and tyrant, President John Pombe Magufuli. For 18 long days, he vanished from public view. Then, without warning, state television announced his death. No official autopsy, no clear explanation, just grief and confusion. For millions of Tanzanians, it felt like the ground had opened beneath them. Magufuli was not a man easy to define. To his supporters, he was the bulldozer, the leader who fought foreign corporations, forced mining giants to pay their dues, and built roads with Tanzanian labor instead of foreign contractors. To his critics, he was an authoritarian who jailed journalists and denied the existence of COVID-19. But whether loved or hated, one thing was undeniable: he made Tanzanians believe again. He gave them pride. He made them feel ownership over their nation. And then, as if history had played a cruel trick, his quiet, soft-spoken Vice President Samia Suluhu Hassan stepped into power. The world celebrated. East Africa had its first female president, and Western newspapers rushed to call her the gentle reformer. The UN applauded Western ambassadors lined up for photo ops, and human rights groups spoke of a new dawn. At first, she seemed different. She reopened newspapers, released detained journalists. Her speeches were calm, measured, and polished. Tanzanians dared to hope that maybe finally the cycle of fear had ended. But politics, especially in Africa, is rarely what it seems. Behind her careful smile stood the same ancient machine that had ruled since independence: Chama cha Mapinduzi, the party of the revolution. Once a movement of liberation, CCM had turned into an empire. It owned everything: the media, the courts, the military, even the meaning of patriotism. And slowly that machine began to move again. Reformers vanished from Samia's cabinet. Old faces reappeared: retired generals, tycoons, and loyalists of past presidents. The same businessmen Magufuli had expelled were quietly welcomed back. Western corporations returned, bringing investment wrapped in contracts that no citizen could read. By 2022, the truth was unavoidable. The woman who had promised reform had become the new mask of the old regime. And the people began to whisper a bitter phrase: Hakuna tofauti, there's no difference. When Tesha appeared on that live stream in 2025, he wasn't speaking as a radical. He was speaking as a witness. He had watched the very institution he served, the military, become part of a system built to protect the few and silence the many. He wasn't calling for blood. He was begging for oxygen for a nation gasping under the weight of corruption and fear. His calmness was his rebellion. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply described what every citizen already knew, but no one dared to say aloud. That democracy in Tanzania had become a theater: elections held for show, opposition parties banned for national unity, journalists silenced for peace. It was not governance anymore, it was choreography. And that's why his disappearance hit so deep. Because Tesha's silence after the livestream was not just the silencing of one man. It was the echo of millions of voices that had been muted before him. Teachers, artists, priests, lawyers, all erased quietly by the same invisible machine. In homes across Tanzania, mothers whispered his name. Students printed his quotes. And within the military itself, quiet discussions began to stir, not of coups, but of conscience. People started asking dangerous questions. If our democracy can erase a soldier overnight, what else can it erase? If our government calls truth treason, who then is betraying whom? From that point onward, Tesha was no longer just a man. He was a mirror. And every Tanzanian, when looking into that mirror, saw themselves tired, silenced, and yearning to speak again. By the time Captain Tesha disappeared, something inside Tanzania had already begun to crack. The silence that once kept people safe now began to feel suffocating. You could feel it in the markets, in the classrooms, in the whispered greetings between neighbors, a shared fear that no longer hid itself but walked openly in daylight. The year that followed 2024 came to be known quietly as the Year of Shadows. More than 80 activists, journalists, and opposition figures simply vanished, not arrested, not tried, vanished. Families searched through hospitals, morgues, and police stations clutching faded photos, only to be told, "We have no information." The disappearances didn't target chaos, they targeted conscience. Those who defended farmers from illegal mining contracts, artists who mocked the regime on TikTok, and lawyers who spoke out against land seizures all were erased with precision. One of them was Ali Mohammed Kibo, a human rights attorney known for defending villagers in Shinyanga against corporate land grabs. After appearing on a small local TV program, he disappeared. 4 days later, his body washed up on the Bagamoyo coast, burned with acid hands tied. No investigation followed. No minister condemned it. The government called it a tragic incident under investigation, but everyone knew what that meant: case closed. That was the new language of control, words polished enough for foreign embassies, yet empty enough to hide the truth. And the more the government spoke of national unity, the more divided and fearful the country became. When The Citizen, one of Tanzania's last independent newspapers, released a short animated video showing a cartoon president flipping TV channels as families searched for missing loved ones, the regime banned it for threatening national harmony. Harmony, that was the word they loved to use. But harmony in Tanzania had begun to sound like a prison word. Still, something remarkable was happening underneath that silence. The fear was changing shape. Students started forming encrypted chat groups. Underground journalists began storing files on foreign servers. Even priests and imams, once careful with every word, began slipping subtle criticisms into sermons. A quiet fire was spreading, invisible but alive. Because here's the truth about repression: it doesn't kill courage, it concentrates it. The government's iron hand only made Tesha's words grow sharper in people's minds. He had said the nation would collapse, and now every vanishing citizen felt like another brick falling from the wall. By late 2024, even government loyalists began whispering the same question: if they can erase him, whose next ministers no longer trusted their own security. Journalists learned to back up every story twice, and yet beneath the fear, something powerful had awakened awareness. That was Tesha's unintended revolution. He didn't call for guns or riots, he made people see. And once people see, truly see, you can't make them blind again. By the time the government banned public gatherings, it was already too late. The awakening had moved online. It lived in whispers, in encrypted messages, in memory. And in that memory, Captain Tesha became more than a man. He became a symbol of what every nation eventually learns: that control can silence the body, but it cannot command the soul. While Tanzanians were learning to whisper their truths in secret, the rest of the world was watching or pretending not to. Western diplomats still called Tanzania a model of stability. They praised its peaceful elections, they celebrated economic progress, and they shook hands with the same politicians who presided over disappearances. In the eyes of Washington, London, and Brussels, stability was more important than freedom as long as Tanzania stayed quiet, signed the contracts, and kept the region calm. But silence has a way of echoing, and in 2025 the echo grew too loud to ignore. When opposition leader John Heche was arrested near the Kenyan border, no one expected what came next. His phone, still streaming live, captured every second. Viewers watched as officers pushed him into an unmarked van. Within minutes, the video spread across social media like lightning. This time, it wasn't just Tanzanians watching. Kenyans, Ugandans, Zambians, even South Africans began posting the same words: "Let him go." Crowds gathered at the border, not soldiers, not rioters. Ordinary people, students, traders, mothers holding nothing but phones. No guns, no slogans, just cameras. And the cameras won. 6 hours later, Heche was released. It was a moment that exposed something profound to the entire continent: that in the 21st century, visibility itself is power. Cameras had replaced barricades. Exposure had replaced rebellion. Sunlight, it seemed, could still kill shadows. The story of Captain Tesha, once confined to Tanzania, now lived in 1,000 digital hearts. From Ouagadougou to Bamako, from Nairobi to Lagos, people began calling him the Invisible Captain. To many, he represented a new kind of African revolution, one without coup guns or bloodshed. A revolution powered by information, truth, and courage. In Burkina Faso, where President Ibrahim Traoré had defied France and expelled foreign troops, Tesha's story became a rallying cry. Burkinabe youths painted his face on city walls beside Traoré's 2 soldiers: 2 generations, 1 struggle. The message was clear: Africa's new fight isn't about territory, it's about truth. In the United States, most mainstream outlets stayed silent. But within the African diaspora, Tesha's name began circulating on podcasts, blogs, and Black heritage forums. He was compared to Thomas Sankara not for his power, but for his principle. A soldier who chose conscience over comfort. And that resonated deeply with older African Americans who had lived through Malcolm X, the civil rights movement, and decades of government deception. They understood that when governments use the word stability, it often means someone else's voice has been buried. Tesha's story reached across oceans, not because it was dramatic, but because it was familiar. It was the same story told in whispers from Ghana to Chicago, from Mali to Mississippi, the story of people who refuse to stay silent even when the world rewards their silence. And that is why the world should pay attention. Because in every place where truth is treated as a threat somewhere, another Captain Tesha is preparing to speak. Tanzania today looks calm on the surface. The markets are open, the streets are busy, the president smiles for cameras, and international observers still describe it as one of Africa's most stable democracies. But beneath that calm, there is something trembling, not chaos, but consciousness. Captain Tesha may have vanished, but his voice never did. It lives in the restless hearts of a generation that refuses to inherit fear as their future. In university dorms, students whisper his words before exams. In church halls, pastors quote him in sermons about truth. And in the quiet corners of Dar es Salaam, parents tell their children stories about the soldier who spoke and disappeared not as a warning but as a prayer. Because once a nation learns to see its own chains, pretending they don't exist becomes impossible. That is the quiet revolution. Tesha began one built not on blood but on clarity. And that clarity has begun to spread far beyond Tanzania. Across Africa, from Ouagadougou to Lagos, young people are asking harder questions about their leaders, their elections, and the price of their so-called stability. They are not calling for chaos. They are calling for honesty, for leadership that serves, not consumes. And somewhere the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré, the young captain of Burkina Faso who defied empires to reclaim his people's dignity, stands shoulder to shoulder with Tesha in the hearts of Africans who are done waiting for permission to be free. Two soldiers, two nations, one message. Silence is not peace. Obedience is not unity. And fear is not stability. The question now is not what happened to Captain Tesha. The question is what happens to us, to all of us, when we see what he saw and still choose silence. Because the real danger to any nation is not the one who speaks, but the millions who stay quiet. So tonight, wherever you are, whether in America, Africa, or anywhere, freedom feels fragile. Remember this. You don't need a uniform to fight for truth. You only need the courage to speak it. If you believe that truth is stronger than fear, if you believe that light is stronger than silence, share this story. And if you believe, as Captain Tesha and President Ibrahim Traoré do, that Africa's destiny belongs to its people, not its rulers, then subscribe, stay with us, and help the light reach where silence still rules. Because this story isn't over. It's only just beginning.